My 1990 Quad Runner 250 had a damaged frame. The lower tubes were rusted through and damaged from dents and bashes. This sort of damage is caused when dirt and mud and cow shit gets caught between the bash plate on the bottom and the lower tubes. So quad bikes that have come from dairy farms are often the worst for this sort of damage. I made a template tracing the original tubes. It would act as a jig for positioning the new tubes and the various lugs. Tube spacing and bend angles were estimated and transferred to a CAD system. Rotted tube removal began. Most of the centre cross member was retained. The rear swing arm mount was not removed. The bottom tube was ground out of the centre bracket. 1 inch or 25.4 millimetre by 1.6 millimetre mild steel tube was used. It was bent on a JD squared tube bender, fitted with 3-inch centerline radius dies. Short pieces of 7/8 inch tube were used under the joins. As well as butt welding, rosettes were also formed through small holes either side of the joint. After doing all that work and sighting the frame afterwards, it was quite apparent there was a twist in the front of the frame. I created a flat patch and bolted the frame down.
The twists that were in this frame were caused by a big impact in this area, pushing, possibly from that side, pushing this structure across, and this structure is connected to the main frame. I've cut these pieces out on through there because I reckon it's chrome moly tube, and there was no way I could see of getting it to give it all. So then those top tubes were connected with pieces like that, which I've also removed from both sides. There was obvious distortion through here and in these lower tubes. So all these pieces were cut out to give me the ability to try to realign this section, which is obviously on the ground on the lower side, and also the upper suspension points were also belted out of alignment about 10 millimeters this way. I could work the 10 millimeters. This rod, prior to the modifications I've made now, would not go through both those clevises like it is now. It was out of alignment by at least 10 millimeters. Same on the other side, because that bar there joins both sides together, and there's a bar at the front there joining both those front clevises together. So this frame coming up from here, which continued on round to here with as a one continuous tube, was belted out of alignment by at least 10 millimeters. It's had to be pushed this way 10 millimeters to get this bar to go back in. Now, pushing that 10 millimeters sideways it just wanted to spring back here. I couldn't lever it, I couldn't do anything with it. So what I'd done is I put a saw cut through here. I figure that piece is forming like a parallelogram. I put a saw cut through here. I put a saw cut 3/4 of the way through here. That's just 3/4 of the way through. On the side that it needed to bend towards, so that cut's going to close up once it moves. Similar arrangement on this other side with a saw cut here, this time in from the bottom, the other side was in from the top, and a saw cut through here in from this side, because the thing had to come this way, and that's how those cuts would, I believe, close up if it moved across. In fact, it did move across quite easily after all the frustration of it swinging and springing back. I was getting it to move 20 millimeters with a big lever, but it would always spring back to the 0 point. So with those 4 cuts in that, I was able to bring this section across the 10 millimeters. And then on the top here, this rectangular section here, it's looking fairly rectangular now. It used to look more like a parallelogram, probably also 10 millimeters out of alignment. And the way I've addressed that to some extent is, again, I've cut in from opposite corners depending on what sides needed to open up and what sides needed to close up. I figured the weld, after I'd cut it, the new weld would shrink the cut together and help bring this parallelogram back to square, this back to rectangular like it is fairly well now. Now there's still a bit of a twist in that top box. You can tell I've got bits of rod coming through there. That's the lower one here, which is pretty much parallel to the center line now that this center has been moved. And this one, you can see, I think in the picture even, it's still out of alignment. I've moved it a reasonable distance, but it's still over the length of that rod there, perhaps 3 millimeters from one end to the other, out of parallel to that rod, which I think is pretty close. I'm at this stage going to reconnect this original tube with a new corner piece that I'll bend up, and same over this side, and so make that rigid, and then try to address this section being still slightly on the piss. It may require another couple of cuts just below those brackets there to get a bit of movement in the tube. The tube itself just doesn't seem to want to bend at all while it's in the full section. I'm cutting it back to cut 3/4 of the way through to get it to bend, and it bends quite successfully. And I'm having a chicken shit weld over where I've cut to repair it. It's basically tacked back, and I'm getting somewhere slowly with that. Otherwise, the rear of the frame, I've welded pipes in, and I've ground over the welds and tried to see that there's not too many holes left in it. It's pretty rough. Now, this part of the tube here is original. From there to there, I hadn't originally planned to remove that, but I found that the one from here to here, from this is where the original cut was made, was all rotted out in the bottom there. So I fabricated a new piece of tube, but just half of, and I've put a weld halfway along the seam there so I didn't have to upset the pipe inside this fitting, and it seems to have come together fairly well with a pretty chicken shit weld across here halfway through the tube. So I don't know how strong any of this will be. It's got to be better than what it was, but never as good as the original chrome moly tube that Obviously the front's all made out of. If it was just mild steel, I think I wouldn't have had too much trouble twisting it back and with a bit of heat and things to get it close. But no, that's where I'm at with it at this stage. I'm going to get the pipe bender out and bend up a couple more bends for here, and then try and work out how to flatten the ends of the tubes out to join these ones in like the originals were. You can see in this light one of the cuts there that I've made to get that frame to move sideways. It hasn't been tacked up yet.
This is the punch and die I've made to crush the tube so it wraps around the bend. The front lower tubes are reconnected to the rear tubes. I think I've removed the twist in the front of this frame. I'm pretty happy with the result. It just needs a clean up and paint now. This quad bike is now fully operational. Get out to your shed and have some fun.